Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are back with yet another exciting episode of the Unleashing DePIN Pod. Today, we are joined by not one, but two special guests. We've got Coleman and Ryan from Foam, and they are doing some amazing things in the DePIN space with proof of location, and I'm really excited to get a chance to chat. We've had some interesting conversations offline, learning about how you guys got into the space, learning about all the incredible things that you're doing. So maybe as a level set, we can just start by having you share with the audience a little bit about who you guys are, how you got into Web3, what your background is, and then we can get into it from there.
Sounds great, Tyler. Happy to be here. Hey, this is Ryan, one of the co-founders of the Foam protocol. I have quite a long background in Web3. Kind of found out about Bitcoin when I was in college around 2013, 2014, and kind of have degrees in economics and political science, but was doing work in architecture post-grad. And at the time, there was a lot of post-recession conversations in architecture of how could architects start their own project without needing a developer. And so Bitcoin was still kind of in the news, and the value of blockchain, thinking of how that could be used for either crowdfunding spaces, but ultimately how the built environment could intersect with blockchain tech. So that was back in 2015. It's been a long time coming to see kind of this DePIN world start to shape up and see how the blockchain and physical world are actually interacting. So that was kind of my background of Web3 high level, but how about you, Coleman?
Yeah, well, happy to be here. I'm Coleman. I'm a technical product manager at Foam. I guess going back to how I got into Web3, it started in 2017, sort of the beginning of that cycle. My friends were talking about crypto and decided to kind of look into it one night and ended up listening to a podcast actually with Nick Szabo. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he was one of the original kind of guys on the Bitcoin Talk forum. And learned kind of through that about smart contracts and got really sort of rabbit holed from there on out. So became really interested in Ethereum. And then in 2018, found Foam, was really impressed with what they were working on, really excited about what they were trying to do in terms of connecting the physical world to Ethereum, to blockchains in general, and thought it was really important. So I got really involved in the Foam sort of online community channels as a community member, and then became sort of a power user of the Foam map, which we may talk a little bit about here. And then got in touch with Ryan to do some contract work on behalf of the Foam community in terms of organizing and managing community feedback for the Foam map user interface and smart contracts, and then ended up taking a job full-time with Foam back in 2022 when a position opened for the Trust Zone beta program, which I think we'll talk more about, and then have transitioned more into a product development role over the past year or so as we've been focused on our MVP. So that's kind of my background. And then before starting with Foam, I did 8 years in management consulting and tech consulting and supply chain. So that's sort of my traditional career background before crypto.
Yeah, that's awesome. And there's always different ways that people find themselves into Web3 through traditional or maybe sort of untraditional means. I think one of the things that's really interesting specifically about Foam and the Foam protocol is that you guys predate this sort of DePIN term. And so it's really cool to see how what you were doing was DePIN before DePIN was DePIN. And now you guys are really, as all the rest of the world is coming up to speed, you're sort of ahead of the curve. So maybe you can give a bit of backstory, Ryan or Coleman, on how Foam got started, what the initial problem set that you were looking to solve, and just share kind of the history of how the project got off the ground.
Yeah, sure. So I have two other co-founders, and we all have a background in the actual architecture field. My co-founder and CTO, Christopher, was a geometrist, actually worked on the Apple campus, so designing 3D shapes. He was a very early member of this company, Consensus, that was very involved with launching Ethereum. And we got connected just through being some of the only people on Twitter talking about blockchains who liked architecture. And actually, we started first as an architecture art project. We won a competition to build architecture, and we built on a full street in New York City on the Bowery, the blockchain made out of 10-foot foam blocks, and actually had a token on something called Counterparty, which was on Bitcoin at the time. And then had a block sale where the blocks got sold, and we had a fund and a community. very early days. And we used that funds to actually set up what we call the mining station, where we had like an inflatable bubble you could go inside that captured the heat from Ethereum miners. And that was part of the Chicago Architecture Biennial, and then was recreated by a number of artists in the Web3 space. But as around that time, ICOs started happening and different protocols like Gnosis were popping up and Augur. And we started to realize the value of protocols and that, there's going to need to be location standards or geospatial attributes for blockchains. So that's where we started working on just like basic standards for encoding things, and really started to realize the power of protocols, and got started with some geospatial stuff, but ultimately realized for real world interactions, locations can be spoofed, and that's how we got more into foam of proof of location as we know it today.
That's incredible. Just as an anecdote, is the name of the project, did that spur or come out of you guys actually building these foam blocks that were in New York? Is that how the name originated?
That the name comes from that project, yeah. And we actually found like things like Yankee Stadium or something, or Millennium Park in Chicago. They use these big foam blocks instead of dirt because they're like cheaper and denser or something like that. And there's also a philosopher, Peter Sloterdijk, that has this concept of like foam space being like after modernity, there'll be this like internetworks of like bubbles as a metaphor. So it was like both, and architects use a lot of foam models like to carve stuff out. So the name comes from that first project.
That's amazing. I love to hear that. It's always great to hear the interesting story arcs of how some of these things come to fruition. So just diving in a little bit, can you provide a high-level overview of the foam protocol, specifically what you were building? Maybe talk about some of the hardware components, other products you're rolling out. Just give an overview, and then we can start diving in a little bit deeper for everybody.
Yeah, so we have a long and varied background, but our primary focus for the last few years and going forward is what we call proof of location. And this is about how do we get on location data on chain that has a little level of security and backing that we would kind of hold Bitcoin, Solana, or Ethereum to. So that has some sort of fraud proof or anti-spoofing mechanism. GPS is an amazing technology and has unlocked tons of value, from like Garmin trackers to Uber to Pokemon Go. But the system is one directional, so GPS doesn't know anything about what's happening on the ground. And therefore, it's really easy to lie about your location. It's called spoofing. And there's other ways to disrupt GPS called jamming. And so we realized, thinking a while back, that for something where you unlock a payment or it's a decentralized smart contract, if you wanted some location attribute, it could be easily spoofed. And so we've been working on a hardware solution that is like an on-the-ground GPS, like a terrestrial network. We call them zones of coverage, and there is custom hardware involved of radios. And yeah, so we've seen some on-chain projects, some in DePIN, that have had people spoofing their location, and we want to provide an on-chain primitive where anyone could get involved and offer the network services, but then any application, whether it's deliveries or minting an NFT, could hook into this service as well and add extra layer of security for location.
Yeah, just want to add on a bit to what Ryan said around like the different ways that you can spoof. So since the system is passive and it just broadcasts down, passive radio signals from space, you can actually have like other radio equipment on the ground that broadcasts a similar signal, but at a different time. So it confuses GPS receivers in terms of where they are. And this is something that you're seeing, for example, in, as an electronic warfare technique, actually in like the Russia-Ukraine war, also in the Israel-Hamas war, where there's like GPS-guided missiles that, Hamas or Hezbollah are shooting kind of over Israel that can then be spoofed into the ocean. So you can use it kind of for defense in that regard. But it's not just limited to nation-state level attacks there. There's also pretty cheap hardware you can get, for example, on Alibaba, or you can get like HackRF kits that allow you to kind of do this yourself with just a couple $100 of equipment and free online software. And we sort of address that problem because all of the radio signals that are sent in the foam network are actually encrypted. So they're signed by the private key of the device that broadcasts the signal. And then the receiving device is able to authenticate the device based on the signature of the message. So everything's encrypted by default. GPS doesn't have that. And then the other way that you can sort of spoof your location is that, since the calculation of your location is purely on the receiver side, for example, on your smartphone, you can actually go into your smartphone and change your GPS location. And that's sort of the spoofing that Ryan was alluding to with like Pokemon Go, for example, and
Really?
pretty widely sort of prevalent within, the consumer gaming space. So you just go into your phone, with different app store sort of apps, or even Apple's developer tools, and sort of actually now even like pre-program a route that you can spoof. So you can say like, I'm walking down this street, at this pace, or I'm driving down the highway, and then I just got off at this exit. So the spoofing technology out there is just getting better and better, and there's not really a great way to address it besides just trying to patch together anti-spoofing software for each app individually.
Wow, that's incredible. I didn't realize that at the device level, like with an iPhone, for example, that you were able to functionally trick or change the GPS location to be able to spoof yourself. I didn't even, is that something that you can do directly on the phone, or do you need additional sort of software to be able to pull that off?
Unlike an iPhone or Android in developer mode, you can just, like, if you plugged it into your computer, you can do it. And then they're like
Really?
in the App Store that do it. And with Pokemon Go, it's interesting because there's a very active subreddit. There's no monetary incentive, but the reason they want to spoof is if you live in like a rural area, not much happens in the game, so people want to pretend they're in New York or something. And it's been like a 7-year cat and mouse game where Niantic puts out like some sort of update to try and stop spoofing. They find a new way to do so. And we've spoken with some people from the company that have actually missed some revenue opportunities with sharing revenue with stores players go to, because they can't actually verify if those players are in the city. And Uber, similar scenario.
And the way that we're able to kind of solve that is because the system is bidirectional, meaning the user transmits a signal and then it gets picked up by the zones, and the zones actually calculate their user's location. So they have awareness of the user, and that's posted on the blockchain as sort of this NFT that, is in control of the person who actually requested that location proof. So it goes on to this sort of global registry that is the blockchain of your location.
Interesting. So you guys are functionally building sort of this layer that fits on top of the maybe GPS that can be utilized by any project that wants to verify users are in the location they are. Is that sort of a fair assessment then?
Yeah, definitely, Tyler. And on the U.S. government side, they've actually studied 10 companies who can offer backups or alternatives to GPS. And the conclusion was GPS just does way too much, that there can't be like a singular backup, because even like ATMs use it to synchronize their clocks. And kind of the report from the Department of Homeland Security called for like a array of new ecosystem that can be industry specific. So we see ourselves on the more open source, decentralized side of things, where some other company may have, bigger hardware and license spectrum and can do positioning that way. But we want to be, I know modular is a hot word now, but a way that anyone could add this location to their stack. It doesn't mean don't use GPS. It means you could have this extra layer of security in your user.
Interesting. It's a big problem that probably manifests itself in a variety of different ways. Pretty amazing to think about this, building this alternative to GPS that can be used. Coleman, you touched on quite a few of the different components, but can you take us in the weeds a little bit around some of the underlying technology and the hardware that really enables Foam to function the way it does?
Yeah, so there's really kind of three different categories of technology that are used to kind of support the Foam protocol proof of location. I'll start with the hardware. So for the hardware, we have these radios that have to be deployed to form a zone. We call them zone anchors. Up until this year or so, we've been using a build-it-yourself version of this, which is based on a Raspberry Pi. So the Raspberry Pi is sort of the central CPU. It also uses an FPGA. We call it a foam hat because it sits on top of the Raspberry Pi. And we use a LoRa chip so that the system, can transmit LoRa signals, and that's the radio sort of front end that we use for the time stamping and the radio signals. So that's the hardware side. We also are now moving towards a plug and play model, and we've been working on this for quite a while, but We're kind of focused more on the blockchain aspect last year. So now in 2024, we're really sort of accelerating, finishing our plug and play model. The hardware is done, but we just need to integrate it with the rest of our software stack. And we expect to see a lot better performance from the plug and play model. We're using a stronger FPGA by Xilinx, which I believe was bought by AMD a couple of years ago. So it's AMD FPGA, so it's an accelerated hardware unit. We also have a custom PCB, so all the chips are on the same board, which helps with like I/O and all the chips being able to communicate with each other quickly. And then it also has like a very weatherproof, like professional enclosure, so the durability of the device should be better. On the user side, like if you're someone who wants to actually mint a location proof using a zone, you need to have a handheld device. And we've shared some photos of these on our Twitter. There's a prototype we just released, and that's essentially just a LoRa chip and a microcontroller. It's a handheld device that you just click a button and it sends a LoRa signal. So we're also going to be working on productizing that over the next year or so. But yeah, I guess that's a long answer there on the hardware side. On software, we have a number of different custom software packages we've been working on, especially over kind of the early years of proof of location in like 2020, 2021, all the way from firmware that we developed to actually timestamp the radio signals to do the localization. We've also got a pipeline that calculates the localization based on that input data. And then we have user interfaces. So we have a user interface called Hostel, which is a web application for interacting with zones. If you're a zone operator, as we call that, somebody who manages a zone, you can use Hostel to do that. And then now we're working on, as part of our MVP, integrating this presence claim functionality, or the location proofs, into Hostel as well. So that's where you'll be able to use that as a user. And then finally, we also have a sort of blockchains and smart contracts as the last remaining piece on the tech front. So over 2023, we really shifted our focus on the crypto front, and we forked the op stack, Optimism's open source stack of technology for rollups. So we have a rollup running locally as kind of a DevNet with different smart contracts on it for proof of location. There's a blog post out there if anyone's interested in learning more about what some of those contracts look like. But I would say the most important one is the presence claim contract, which actually mints the location on chain as an NFT, so then it can be, in your wallet and used in different Web3 applications. So yeah, long-winded answer there, but that's kind of the full software stack from a high level.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I'd love to dig into a couple of these pieces together, specifically the Optimism stack a little bit in a second here. One of the questions that I have was for projects or businesses that are looking at working and integrating with what you're building. What is sort of the level of security that customers or users could expect with this proof of location protocol?
Yeah, great question. I think when we started out, we had, the highest level of security in mind, what's called like Byzantine fault tolerance from Bitcoin. And that's still a goal and possible in our system. So there's one part of the system of how the radios actually function and how localization works. There's the other side of like tokenomics or staking, or how can I actually trust the system. So we're going to be stress testing all of those mechanisms, but ultimately to be a zone operator, there'll be a service level agreement, like SLA style smart contract, that you'll have to stake in to be eligible to earn rewards or fees, but could also be held accountable if found to be misbehaving. And there'll be ways that like the zone records could be investigated. There's a whole rabbit hole we could get into after the answer of like, how do you trust a new zone in the middle of nowhere that no one's ever been to? So I can get into that. So it's meant to have that level of security of like, what blockchains offer in terms of security and consensus mechanisms. That said, and we'll get into our beta, but in a lot more real world testing, we realized like the perfect all four heard you at a nanosecond level and signed you is like maybe less feasible in more realistic zones for every attempt. So more recently, we've added multiple localizers to our pipeline to give more quantity of results, and then the user can kind of select in terms of accuracy if that's good enough for them. So now even if like 1 or 2 zone anchors heard you, you could get a witness and still sign that and pass that on chain. If at least 3 heard you, you get like an estimated localization that's sometimes accurate, sometimes a little bit off. And then if you get the all 4 signed, that's like the Holy Grail one. So we now have like options in the flow. So in terms of like what an end user can expect, it's kind of like when you deposit to an exchange, like do you want 15 block confirmations or 60? So depending on the application, they could say like, we want this number of presence claims from you in this time window, or just one is fine if it's just a sticker that you're giving out. So we tried to make it flexible in that sense. Hope that answers.
Yeah, that definitely answers, and it segues nicely into the next question that I have, which is your beta program, your Trust Zone beta program that you've been working on and you currently have running. Can you talk a little bit about the status of that, and maybe take us into some of the details and the specifics about what you are doing with the beta in relationship to some of these other technical considerations that you're real world stress testing as we speak?
Definitely. I'll let Coleman speak to that as he's been overseeing it. But just for some context, we're based in Brooklyn, in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So we've set up our first network there. And once everything's been working well, we were like, to move forward, we really need to see how it performs in different environments. So that was kind of the first time we had an open call for people to get involved, and we had participants both in rural and urban environments. And yeah, Coleman was really overseeing that in terms of all the guides and material and processes. So if you want to take it from here.
Yeah, so we started the Trust Zone beta program back in 2022, I think mid-2022, and the goal of it, kind of like Ryan said, was to take the results that we got from the Brooklyn Navy Yard zone that we run ourselves and, simulate that, replicate it in other zones in different environments to sort of stress test the system, especially the hardware and the software for localization, because we didn't really have our cryptographic components integrated yet, like our rollup and our smart contracts. So we were really just focused on like stress testing to learn more about key parameters like distance, line of sight, internet bandwidth requirements, figuring out how we could use solar power, for example, all sorts of things. And the program went really well. It ran for a while, but we sort of wrapped up the program at the end of last year, and sort of think of this now as more of a continuously running physical test network that's going to be continuing to run, into a full-blown mainnet production launch. And we're going to use this physical test network to test new features as we roll them out, like our smart contracts and these presence claims or these location proofs. So we're currently testing all of that now with this physical test network. But I would say a couple of like key learnings from the Trust Zone program were, one, it really reinforced the need for accelerated hardware, for better hardware for what we were trying to do. The Raspberry Pis had sort of inherent limits with like how well they can process the signal. There was limits of all the chips, sort of being connected through pins instead of being on a single, PCB. So we're now really pushing forward with the plug and play hardware, as I sort of mentioned before. That was one of the key learnings. And then the second was that in order to kind of reinvigorate our community and try to kind of grow the audience of people interested in both participating on the supply side of providing zones, but also on the demand side of being able to like do something with the zones and mint these location proofs, we needed to finish out those remaining cryptographic components of our proof of location stack. So that involves, like I said, deploying our own rollup and the smart contracts, and now allowing people to actually mint those location proofs on chain as an NFT. So, that's the direction we've been moving in now, and that's the MVP, which is what we've been working on.
Yeah. And you guys have shared some content on, X and Mirror about your MVP. Is that something you can talk a little bit about in terms of sort of where it's at and where it's going in terms of timelines for folks?
Yeah, I just want to add on the last question quick, because I know it was in the actual question. We do have a wait list still for the Trust Zone program, and kind of are talking to people on a rolling basis based on these kind of requirements that the old beta has. Some zones are still coming online. One just actually did in a university in New Zealand.
Oh, wow.
We were testing that yesterday. But we are going to have a renewed call for zones with the plug and play models. So you can join the waitlist, or if you have a zone that could be set up right away, get in touch. Otherwise, we're going to have a renewed call. So, keep us in mind.
Yeah, we'll be sure to link all that as well for people to join the waitlist, so they can easily find that too.
Answer your question there, Tyler, then about the MVP. So that's, kind of what I was talking about, where we are, building all of this cryptographic, all the cryptographic elements of our stack to actually enable proof of location. So it's an MVP of proof of location. And what that means is you can now actually use zones to, post your location on chain as an NFT. So that required a lot of work. I think I already talked a bit about deploying the rollup and the smart contracts, and now testing all of that at our existing network of zones and our physical testnet. But it also required kind of like integrating all of the different software and hardware that we had been working on before the Trust Zone program and during it. For example, all of the firmware, the software, the Raspberry Pi radios, and now the plug-and-play radios, so that all of that works seamlessly as like one product that can, deliver this proof of location on chain. So it was a lot of work, but we're sort of wrapping that up now. We just, I guess before the holidays, we have a blog post on our Mirror site that is a demo of minting presence claims on desktop. And over the past week, we've sort of finished up the user flow for minting presence claims on mobile. So that's going to be announced soon. We're going to have a demo of that for folks to check out. And then the next step will be actually opening that up as an open beta for people to, outside of our initial beta program participants, get their hands on mobile node hardware, get access to our hostile web application so they can go to zones and actually start minting their own presence claims.
That's fantastic.
Just to summarize, I guess, previously we've been trying to get the localization aspect to work. That's working. So now you can sync a mobile node to your Ethereum wallet in our web app. And then if you're in your zone and click a button, you can on-chain end over radio, be localized, see how accurate it was, and mint it. So that's the MVP, and use cases and proof of concepts of apps that can use this is really the next step. This is just the end-to-end process of the underlying tech.
This certainly sounds like there's been a significant amount of work that goes into that. So hats off to the team for making all of that happen. I wanted to segue into another aspect of the stack that you talked about earlier, which was your guys' decision to use Optimism for Foam. Can you talk about what sort of drove the shift into choosing Optimism specifically?
Yeah, happy to. I think about a year ago, we were trying to look, when it was ETH Denver coming up again, looking at all the different offerings, and there's a lot of ZK L2s as well. Because our team just has experience with Ethereum, to try to make things easier, we were looking for something that uses the EVM. I think we all think Solana is very interesting, and we use a lot of Rust on our side with the embedded systems. But just try to leverage our experience, we were looking into EVM compatibility, and that still left a lot of options. But it wasn't that straightforward for us to actually pick one. And one of our lead developers came up with like one core requirement, which was that he wants to be able to run the whole system himself, like in the office, and be able to fork everything. And that's actually prohibitive with any of the ZK ones, like ZK Sync, Scroll, or StarkNet, because they have prover networks of like GPUs or FPGAs. So you can't replicate that in your office without them telling you how much hardware they're using to prove it, and that becomes like a trade secret. So we kind of ruled out those. And I think Arbitrum is now more open to being able to fork or use their code, but about a year ago, it was a bit more limited. And so Optimism was the only one that was like, hey, you want to fork this, run it yourself, make changes, like do whatever you want with it, like go at it. And so that's kind of how we settled there. But it made for a nice reconnection, because when we first were validating radios connecting to Ethereum, we actually did so on the early prototypes of the Optimism team, which was called Plasma, back in 2019. So we kind of somehow it advanced in some sort of parallel tracks that it then made sense to do so. And so that's now opened up a lot for us because there's many teams building on the OP stack. And so there's more opportunities to, connect with projects or deploy our demos on like a chain like Base, for example, but then that doesn't mean you necessarily live there forever, but there's, just interoperability both in audience members and in the technology. So it just kind of worked out for us in that sense by checking off some of the other options.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty logical conclusion to come to in terms of the stack that you guys end up building on, which is really fantastic. And hearing that it came full circle is just sort of the cherry on top, if you will. For users that are interested, can you talk about some timelines or some expectations for releasing your plug-and-play hardware, and maybe share some other plans that you have cooking up for what's to come ahead?
Definitely, I'll let Coleman share some, but we're trying to, please reach out if you're going to be at any of events you'd like to see foam at. I know NFT NYC week is coming up, so we're talking to some potential partners there to open up our zone or give out hardware. And a renewed call for these plug-and-play ones, hopefully by the end of this quarter. But yeah, if Coleman, you want to speak to any of that?
Yeah, I guess I would just break it down kind of on the demand and the supply side. So if you're somebody who is interested in minting presence claims with our existing zone network, at this point, wait for a demo of our mobile flow. That's going to be out very shortly. And then we're going to be looking at actually opening, like I said, this up as an open beta for others to kind of get their hands on prototype mobile nodes so that they can interact with zones and mint presence claims. They'll also have to get access to Hostel, our web application, but that's pretty easy. So we're probably going to have a sign-up form for that. We may do it on Farcaster. We've got a pretty active Farcaster channel that we just created. So if you don't follow us there, please do. And we'll, of course, announce it on X as well. But then, as Ryan said, we're also exploring different use cases that we can sort of demo, foam supporting. And then to shift over to the supply side, I think we already mentioned, but we are we have this continually sort of rolling open invite for new zones. So if you're interested in participating, I could talk about what some of those requirements are, although they might change when we sort of finish testing our plug-and-play hardware. But you can go to our website, you can sign up. We have a waitlist form there. Those are that's kind of what we're doing next and how people can get involved.
That's great. And again, we will be sure to link that below so folks can get involved. I'd love to just circle back a little bit about some of the use cases. You've talked about things like the Pokemon Go example, all the way up to sort of nation state wars that are quite serious. What would you say are, if there was one or a few sort of golden examples that foam is really purpose built for, that you can sort of envision becoming a large source of business that is coming onto the protocol and leveraging what you're building? Can you talk maybe about one or two of those for everybody to get the ideas flowing?
Definitely. I'll preface it with one cop-out answer with, as this is like a new technology, we hope the best use case is something we can't think of on this call and something that somebody else comes up with. I always like to think how Twitter didn't invent the hashtags, but people just started using them, and then it became like part of the identity of the product.
Right.
But yeah, there's tons of like existing examples where you got an Amazon package. It's a photo of somebody's porch. You don't know whose porch that is, and that Amazon person was paid. So like deliveries, what have you. I like this simple example of like a train and insurance. Insurance is a lot with parametric insurance as well, but this is a fake example, but the train's late, you're there. Can you prove it? You got some sort of rebate. But we're thinking of things that kind of couldn't be done already, and I'm sure Coleman has some extra ideas, but something like this board game called Settlers of Catan, if you've ever heard of it, where there are resources. So we're thinking of spinning up a demo game where some resources are only available in our zone and some are only, in the San Diego zone. Some are maybe more rare than others. And so to get enough resources to build something, you either have to go to more than one zone or start to trade with people and start to really tap into use cases that you couldn't do without like verified proof of location. And there's tons of industrial, supply chain use cases that exist today that foam could, lower costs or add security, but we're very excited about things maybe you couldn't do with smart contracts. What do you think, Coleman?
Yeah, I would say before I go into my golden use case, I think to start, we are definitely sort of targeting crypto Web3 stuff. I think it would be really cool to see stuff like location gated, like group chats or DAOs or Farcaster channels. I think Farcaster already has the ability to gate either channels or groups by NFTs or tokens. So that would be pretty easy to do once once this presence claim is on chain on like a public network. Also stuff like payment on location or location specific bounties, location gated NFT mints. We've talked to a couple NFT projects that are interested in collaborating on that. So those are some like low hanging fruit things. But then going beyond that, I think one like very long shot thing that I've heard people talk about on Twitter is like, I guess we'll know we've made it is if we are actually being used to enforce the geographic decentralization of like core blockchain infrastructure. So for example, in order to run a node of, whatever blockchain or middleware service is being provided, you actually have to prove that your node is running from, let's say Africa or somewhere where there's fewer nodes, and that could sort of increase the rewards. I also would say, as somebody who has a supply chain background, it seems like a lot of the supply chain on blockchain stuff has kind of died for now, as like the whole private blockchain network thing has kind of faded away. I was never that interested in like Hyperledger Fabric, which was IBM's like proprietary blockchain framework, but I'm still really excited about like embedding business logic, for example, like supply chain reorder logic or payment logic into smart contracts. So like as soon as your inventory hits a certain level, a reorder automatically happens, and that triggers a payment to a supplier, and it triggers movement in your supply chain. So I think that kind of stuff's really cool. You could sort of have these really well orchestrated, really efficient, and sort of autonomous supply chains that I think would at least minimize certain disruptions that we've seen recently, like on the labor side. So that stuff's really futuristic and cool, and I think it's going to come back at some point. It would be great if foam was used as kind of the location substrate, for those sorts of systems.
Yeah, and to Coleman's point about enforcing blockchain decentralization, I believe this might have happened with Filecoin. I think they have slashing, and their system proves that the files are on different hard drives, so you can make sure they're spread across. But I believe there was a fire in Asia in one of these warehouses, and so like somebody's files were lost because the files are on many hard drives, but the hard drives were all in the same warehouse. And I think that's long-term on Filecoin's roadmap. To have some sort of proof of location to, ensure that this data is, yes, on different machines, but are those machines in the same room, or can I guarantee they're like actually physically distributed?
Sure. It's one of those very open-ended opportunities that, a lot of folks probably don't think explicitly is part of the problem stack until you begin to kind of dig into all of the negative ramifications that can fall out as a result of not either being decentralized or not being able to validate some of these location contingencies, which it's really incredible to hear how sort of robust your guys' protocol is to be able to support the myriad of use cases that can exist.
Yeah, one last long shot, moonshot came to mind is like hyper local stable coins, because like the supply and demand, like instead of algorithmically, but have it be by like the actual population set, which is essentially how like the Fed works with like the dollar, but just have it be for like one county or something.
Yeah. Oh, that would be awesome. That's a pretty interesting use case in and of itself. Amazing.
Yeah. So we hope, like I said, my original answer is that the coolest or most exciting use cases are things that people can build with this, verifiability to be able to plug into smart contracts and location.
Yeah. I think there's going to be some incredible things coming ahead. Well, we've talked about so much in terms of how you got to where you're at today, all of the components, and there are quite a few of them that are involved with building such a robust proof of location protocol. But were there any other final thoughts or things you wanted to share with everybody before we get a chance to wrap it up?
Well, thank you for listening. If you made it this far, we're really passionate about proof of location and have a team that's been dedicated working for a number of years. And I hope through this podcast, it's at least clear why we're working on it and what stage we're in. So we're really excited to start to showcase more of the MVP, move past that with some of these game ideas and demos, and start to build out our community again. So thank you all. Anything else, Coleman, you want to bring up?
Yeah, I know every time we kind of like post something on Twitter, I feel like we get replies like when token moving to L2. So yeah, our foam token has been on Ethereum mainnet and still is there, but we are actively investigating like solutions to bridge foam liquidity over to an L2 network and make it available there for people to, to hold foam, which is going to be a critical component of proof of location in the future and is already being used for the foam app as well. So yeah, just wanted to address that as well. But yeah, if you're interested in getting involved again as a zone operator, reach out on our wait list. There's requirements around like line of sight and distance and needing 4 locations. Some of those requirements are going to relax as we move to our plug and play hardware. But yes, reach out. We check it regularly. If you're a developer, I recommend reaching out to like Ryan or I, either through email or even on our Farcaster channel, because we're starting to check that quite frequently. And then, just keep an eye out there. If you're somebody who wants to get involved as a user, we'll have announcements coming soon about how you can actually mint presence claims.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so is Farcaster sort of the main channel where folks can stay up to date with everything that you guys are working on and announcing?
Our Twitter X account definitely will have all major updates as well as our blog on Mirror. But for Farcaster is having more community possibilities. So we're experimenting with like our custom channel and foam chat room. That's kind of like a Telegram. So if you want to be early there, you can join and help us test it out. So in terms of being able to just get updates, our newsletter, blog, and Twitter will still be a good place. If you want to follow up from this podcast and talk directly to me or Coleman, you can try and join us on Farcaster.
Perfect. And we'll be sure to link all that below for everyone so they can get direct access to you guys and stay involved with the product and the project that you're building. So Coleman, Ryan, I wanted to say thank you so much for coming on. I've learned a heck of a lot about what you're building. It's a big problem with a lot of different moving parts as we've discussed. And so wanted to thank you again for taking the time to really unpack all of that for our listeners. We will be sure to link all of those social links down below. So if you are on Farcaster, absolutely go join. I'm going to go join the group right now. We'll link the X account and your Mirror blog. Want to say thank you. We'll wrap it up here, everybody. Be sure to check out Coleman and Ryan and what they're doing over at Foam. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you.